Hello everyone and welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass, your weekly guide to developing commercial insight that goes just beyond the headlines. Each week, we take one major story and break it down to help you progress through three levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced commercial awareness. Whether you're just starting out or already have some understanding, this program is here to help you think like a commercial lawyer. By the end of today's session, you'll have practical insights that you can use in applications and interviews. So my name is Daniel Shepherd and I'm a law conversion student and a future trainee solicitor. And today I'm joined by Emma, a solicitor with extensive experience in commercial law, and she'll help us explore today's key legal and business topic, offering insights into how lawyers tackle complex commercial challenges. So thank you for joining us today, Emma.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Hi, everyone.
So to start, let's break this down for those that are new to commercial awareness. Could you give a simple overview to this week's story and why it matters?
Of course, I can. So, for starting us off, as usual, with the beginner section of the Compass session, just going to explain to you briefly what we're going to cover and how it might be interesting to you. So, we are going to look at Manchester United's new announcement. It's everywhere. I doubt that you would have missed it. Announcement that they are going to build a new stadium, but it's not just a new stadium, is it? There's talks of a whole regeneration scheme of Trafford, and there's so much that goes into it. Now, this stadium is said to have 1,000 seats, so the capacity is going to have 1,000 potentially. And is that a competition with Everton, who are yet to formally open theirs? So I think they've got 53,000. So very interesting timing with the United's announcement. It's going to cost around £2 billion. And it's going to be the biggest sporting stadium in the UK. And there's lots of other stats that I can share with you as we go through the session. And of course, Dan's going to ask me about those as well. But to get you introduced briefly, we're going to be talking about the new stadium plans.
So, as we start, what are some of the key legal and business concepts that are involved in this?
Oh gosh, where do I start, Dan? Because there's so many, and you think about the involvement of all the different third parties, not just lawyers, that's going to be required for a project like this. And interestingly, even though we've only just found out about it, how many would have been involved up till now? So, of course, as lawyers, we've got to think about confidentiality. There would have been lots of lawyers who would have known about this and couldn't have said anything because they're bound by client confidentiality. And then there's also been architects. The architects have actually been named now. If you think of all these images that we're seeing online of some have called it the Eiffel Tower of the UK, things like that. All these different images that we're seeing online have been crafted by, not just United, the club themselves, but with help of third parties. So lots of different involvements already, not just legal. To focus on the legal side, there will be, and I'm sure a lot of you will be shouting at the screen at me and saying, think about this, think about that, because there's going to be so many. So this is not exhaustive. For those who've been watching the Compass for a while, you'll have some things in mind already, which is great. But you've got the regulatory side, so anything that might be involved there. Of course, you've got health and safety with the building and anything in terms of the stadium itself or the surrounding areas, the individuals that will use it. You've got all the different commercial entities that will be involved that will have their own lawyers or be relying on somebody else's or a law firm to help them with their considerations of it. But not everyone will be happy either with the plans. I'm sure there'll be people impacted nearby who, football fans or not, are thinking about how's this going to affect my business. Old Trafford, the current stadium, we've heard is going to be completely demolished. So what's going to happen there? There would have been lots of conversations about legal pros and cons that would have happened already, but then lots of lawyers waiting to get their teeth stuck into future things like commercial contracts, opportunities business wise. It's going to create 92,000 jobs apparently and 17,000 homes. And those are the positives that we hear. Again, there's legal involvement there, but what's happening to what's going to change as well. So both sides, lots of different angles to think about.
So it's a huge project that's coming up, and I think to round out the beginner section, what might some common misconceptions that people might have about this topic, and are there any different angles that people could look at it from the beginner outset?
Great question. misconceptions maybe, I think I've already mentioned one, is that every lawyer is going to be working on maybe either a positive or a negative side of it, but there's going to be both. It's great news in lots of ways with all the regeneration, but of course some people are going to be fighting the opposite way about disputes. That just tends to happen with projects. We've just had a guest join us. Sorry about that interruption. Yeah, so lots of different misconceptions about legal involvement there. Misconceptions around the type of law. So you might just be thinking, oh, sponsorship or merchandise, or the things that we can see outwardly. If they have a new shop, I'm sure they'll have, United make a lot of money from merchandise, especially internationally. They'll have their own. But who's going to provide the food, the catering, like everything else? It won't just be in-house. So another misconception might be that it's quite limited in terms of legal involvement, but it's not. It's going to be massive. So think big in terms of this. Don't just think about stadium alone. Think wider. And of course, as we move on to intermediate, we'll talk about some of the more trickier parts of law that might come up.
That's great. I think that's going to nicely transition us into the intermediate session. So at the beginner level, the goal is to understand the basics, what is happening and why it matters in a broad sense. This foundation is crucial for moving to deeper business and legal impacts. So now that we understand the basics, we'll dive deeper into how this issue affects businesses and why legal guidance is crucial. So could you explain how this issue specifically impacts companies in this sector and why they might need legal advice?
Absolutely. So in this sector and beyond, we can talk about, because in this sector of, well, what sector do you take really, Dan? You can take sport, you could take construction, which is massive, it's up there. You could take commercial or ESG, so those that are working in the environment side of things, safety, lots of different sectors. But if we go with the main one, which is perhaps construction for now, because that's, I guess, the stage that I know things will be planning ahead and there'll be lots of things being procured, like seats, for example. Who's going to build all of those 100,000 seats and fit them into the ground? But it also links to construction. So with construction, it's an area of law that's a bit tricky because construction contracts usually aren't what you would expect a normal or standard commercial agreement to look like. So as we all envisage a contract, a construction agreement would look a little bit different. And I am not one of these, but I've had experience with it, so I can explain it briefly. But they're usually labeled by letters. So you'll have a letter agreement, like, or so many letters put together. And if you're really interested in this, you can take some time after the compass to look into it, especially if you're interviewing for a firm that offers construction advice. But they're quite nuance as to how you can negotiate, what you can negotiate, and what the form is. But that's for a reason. So we've already said that the stadium's going to cost £2 billion. Now, I don't know the split of what that is on the build and other things, but it's huge. So if you're going to have a contract worth that much, lawyers would negotiate it until the cows come home. You would be negotiating until it's planned to be built, which is in 5 years' time. So what construction agreements aim to do is they have certain parts that are set in stone, so things that aren't negotiable, and then you'll have a part at the back or the front, depending on what it is, where you can discuss the nitty-gritty of the terms. And it makes it a little bit easier, you would say, for lawyers, but also it's not easy because there's still different considerations to take into account with a stadium, for example, or things like that. So that's one of the main areas in this industry that I would say a lawyer would be involved in, especially in construction. And then don't also forget about the different stakeholders you've got to manage. You are managing seniors in huge construction businesses who aren't lawyers, but you're reliant upon them to give you the information. So there's that kind of skill that will go into it there as well.
So, if we stick down the construction route, what are some of the legal risks and challenges that these businesses might face in this scenario?
Let's start with It's interesting, isn't it? Because you want to go straight into, well, who's going to be liable if something goes wrong? But that's just my lawyer head thinking about it. But there'll be lots of different risks in the middle of that that are easily solvable. So there might be risks on timing. So there'll be a project plan, and whoever's driving this, somebody, the board of United, driving it to make sure it's the most commercially viable at the right time, in line with any long-term plan they've got for their business, because don't forget they're a commercial entity as well. They aren't just there to entertain lots of us, depending on if you support United or not. You'd use that word. I'm not sure. But there's different things like timing. So there'll be a key project plan, and if there's a construction lawyer working to that, there's going to be pressure, of course, and there's a risk there. But one of the challenges that link into that risk is the amount of people that you're reliant upon. So if you want to get this built within 5 years, you rewind back the project plan and see, what do we need in place by this time? We can't procure means buy or purchase. We can't purchase the steels for the railings until this contract's signed, and we can't sign this contract until we know that we're definitely going to be going ahead with it from this regulator. So you've got lots of different things to rewind back as like a huge project like this. So as a lawyer, you are a key cog, but one cog in that whole system that's reliant upon everybody. So you've just got to make sure that you're communicating. That's a key risk and challenge, I would say. And then also, yeah, naturally, there's the liability side. So who's going to be liable if something goes wrong? Is that well documented in the contracts and the relationship? Insurance will be massive for something like this. So you'll have insurance lawyers involved. We could go on, but there are many, many risks and challenges that we'd have to think about from a legal point of view, for sure.
And as we're kind of rounding out the also the intermediate level, what sort of regulatory or compliance considerations would come into play with a project of this size? I imagine that there's quite many.
There is, but to give one like key example, I saw something over the weekend that was talking about the height of the stadium.
Mhm.
So it's going to be the highest, it's going to be higher than any other building currently in Manchester. And then what you should be doing when you hear that fact is like commercial awareness. Why could that be an issue? And apply common sense to it as well. Common sense is, if there's a really high building, higher than anything else, what else is in Manchester? A massive airport that's going to be really close by. So if you can start to get that link, especially at this intermediate stage, I mean, there was nothing legal about me connecting those. It was just the height and then thinking airplanes in the same vicinity. Then what you do is you take that to regulatory. So your question, Dan, what are the key regulatory considerations in compliance? There are going to be regulations on airspace and all sorts of things on how tall a building can be. Now, I'm sure before the architects released these plans and before we saw these pictures that they've checked that out, but that would have been no small task. They would have needed someone to interpret what that could have been, how far um, the proximity is to the airport, looking at the runways, the direction of takeoff, because there's lots of different directions that you can take off in different ways for different reasons, or the surrounding areas of the airport. So who knows, there might have been conversations with some chief at the airport, or they might have taken their own advice from a regulatory point of view. It might have just been some quick research. We have AI nowadays. Depending on the risk that people are willing to take is depending on the level of advice that they have. But something like this, you'd really want to get it right. Imagine building something like that and then being told you've got to knock it down because it's really dangerous to airspace and the planes and things. So that would have definitely been a regulatory consideration. So even there's lots of them, including ESG, which we'll get onto in advanced, I thought, why not come prepared with one that people can actually imagine and link it to? And it's got to be the airspace, surely, with the height of the thing. You've got to think about that as well.
Yeah, I think that's quite an important part of it, where a lot of it, when you think of regulations, it comes down to almost common sense in a way, where you look, it's a big building in quite a condensed area with public transport everywhere. There's got to be so many different considerations
Yes.
and so many different like authorities involved. So obviously you've got airspace, you've got the local council, you'll have so many different overseers that they'll have had to have complied with prior to releasing all of this stuff. So yeah, there's definitely so many different ways that this can be looked at. It's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So at the intermediate level, think about how businesses are affected and how law firms support them. This is where commercial interests connect to practical legal work. So, if we shift our focus to the bigger picture, what long-term implications should businesses and law firms anticipate with this sort of project?
A long term, so we're over to advanced now, right?
Yes, to the advanced session now.
So longer term, well, I will be very sensitive about talking about the debts that Manchester United are in, but I think it's over £1 billion worth of debt that they have in the entity in the company at the moment, and we've already mentioned that this is going to cost us. Well, cost them £2 billion at least. And then we know that costs sometimes go over budget. Not that I'm preempting anything like that for them, but it's really expensive. And there's been a statement out there already. It may be the chairman of United, I'm not sure, that said, of course, they've weighed up the cost benefit analysis, and this is going to bring in much more money and be a great investment for them that way. So that is a long term, absolutely a long term plan that businesses are thinking about. And how lawyers and financial advisors feed into that is absolutely key. Because if you are advising United or a connected entity that's providing some sort of material for the stadium, some sort of plan, advice, whether it's goods or services, you will be expected to be feeding into that long term plan as well. Otherwise, you're not on board with the whole commercial goal of the new stadium. So you're very quickly going to be kicked out as an advisor if you're not in tune with what your client wants. And what they want is to make sure this works for their bottom line, for their accounts, to make sure that it's feasible for them commercially. So long-term plans has definitely got to be thinking about the financial stability of the club, and this has absolutely got to work for them with it being so public. I think reputationally as well, if they're coming out saying, it's a worthwhile investment for us, then it's got to be right. So, and a closer to the ground way that a lawyer could do that is, thinking about the fees that you're charging, thinking about the return that the client will get on the amount of money they're spending on things. Lawyers will definitely be privy to some of that because they'll be expected to know the commercial elements of it too, especially if they are advising on risk and how much risk to take with certain things and what the cost benefit analysis is. So long term, the first thing that did come to mind for me, Dan, was definitely the financial side of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, so also obviously it's a very expensive project, so there's going to be so much kind of cost benefit analysis that's going into it from the start. But also I think with the way that things are going, it might be good for us to have a wander down the ESG side of things. So what kind of proactive advice or measures would law firms offer to clients to manage risks and opportunities with the ESG part?
So this stadium has got to be future proof, hasn't it? You're not going to spend that much money on something and, demolish your existing stadium and for it only to be have to be updated in a couple of years' time because it's not compliant or it's not in line with what the government would expect of something like this. We've only seen through the compass and other different areas of news and law that you've really got to stay in tune with these things. For example, the runway, the Heathrow runway we covered, things like that. You've got to constantly think about ESG elements of new business ventures because otherwise you're going to get stung if you're not compliant or at least in communication with the government about something so big as this. So, ESG wise, what United have said is that they're going to harvest solar energy and rainwater, and they've gone quite hard on the environmental aspect of the marketing. Now, that's for a reason. I'm not saying that it's not out of the good of their hearts and that a lot of us do care about this now because, of course, that's a consideration. But also, if they didn't do that, I'm sure they would be getting a lot of pressure on, well, what you're going to be doing for the environment. You're going to have so much more travel to the area. And what they've done is how they've tried to combat this in the initial announcement stages. They've got this kind of umbrella entrance that's going to be really eco-friendly, and of course solar panels and collecting rainwater so that you can reuse it. They've used lots of words like open, earthy, spacious, and there's lots of like greenery around, and that is for a reason. You might think, why are you talking about these things, Emma, when we're supposed to be speaking about law? It's probably to mitigate some of the backlash that they might get. So legally, if I was advising about this, I'd be able to point back and say, hang on, this is what we're doing and this is what we've announced, and this is how we're going to deal with any of those things that argue that we aren't acting in a positive, environmentally friendly way for ESG. And now that's just kind of like mainly the E side of things, but you've got the social and governance side of ESG as well, which has got more of a spotlight on it. And the fact that they've come out and said, it's going to create all of these jobs, people aren't going to be out of jobs, and it's going to create lots of new homes, and it's a wider Trafford regeneration project. It's taking the focus off, oh, United are doing this for themselves. They are actually thinking about the impact on others. So legally, there will be lots of things to consider there as well, including the wording of the announcement, how it's going to be viewed, reputational protection, but also obviously thinking ahead and looking at government consultations and what laws might be enacted as to how the stadium can comply with that in future.
So it's also part in advising how the company of Manchester United will be perceived by the general public, and ensuring that they're kind of maintaining in line with what the law firm will preempt that the government's position will be on ESG policies.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you think about a lot of commercial contracts, they've got within the liability clause. So, just as a refresher, liability dictates who's responsible for which losses. If losses are caused to United or the party that the contract is with, how much is paid to who, in what circumstances, what's covered, what isn't. A lot of liability clauses in commercial contracts will include damage to reputation. So if somebody says something that damages the other party's reputation, or does something, or if, say, United procure these solar panels that are expected to reharvest a certain percentage of the sun's energy and make I don't know, I'm completely making this up, make sure that a lot of the energy for the floodlights is not taken from the grid and it's just reused from the sun. If that isn't happening and somebody finds out about that and tests it, then that's a huge damage to United's reputation, because they've made this big claim to say, we are reusing the sun's energy to light up our stadium, when really it's causing huge damage to the atmosphere, because the amount of light and electricity that you would need to keep those floodlights going, for example, isn't there. So that's a reputational damage issue, and that's a lawyer would deal with that, and you'd be looking at the clause on liability as to, well, what extent is the damage, and they'd have to argue it out. Has it been mitigated? Can you prove it? Is there an indemnity? These are all big words that are legal and that you should look into, especially at this advanced stage, as to what happens there. But yeah, reputation, you would think, oh, how's a lawyer involved? But that's a really good way of bringing it out, Dan. Thank you.
And as we kind of close out the advanced session, how can legal strategies help businesses gain a competitive edge in this space? So what can a lawyer do to almost put Manchester United, or those that are in partnership with United in this project, get a competitive edge?
I've mentioned a couple of times the Everton Stadium.
Mhm.
Now, that's obviously at the latter stages. I think there was an under-18s game that's played there, but it's not officially open yet. They've got a few things to do. If you're working for a law firm that has managed to help Everton with that, that's a competitive edge, because you've done something so similar. It's the same league, it's in the same like year, generation, like however, no matter when it crossed over. And it's very relevant. And if you've pre-advised on something else, even if it's for another club, of course, you've got to retain confidentiality. You've got to make sure there's no conflict of interest. All of these SRA code of conduct things. But the competitive edges, if you are used to doing this, surely United would want to go with someone who knows what they're talking about and they can prove it. So even if you've only touched upon a part of the Everton advice, or even if it was not for Everton, but for somebody else connected to the stadium, then why not sell that as a marketing strategy and a competitive edge and say, we've done this before. And you also asked what can lawyers do to get ahead of that? Well, they can create plans. They can have like standardized automated ways of dealing with something like this, because you and I have just, we've only been speaking for about 20 minutes and we've realized how complicated it is. The more a law firm can automate nowadays and make it easier for the client, the better. And then they can sell that as a product, and then therefore you're much more likely to be chosen, so that they can be a client of yours. You'll be trusted. You'll have that edge over any other firm. There's lots of different ways that firms in the background are fighting over this stuff. So if you can get your ear in anywhere with something connected, it doesn't, of course, there's lots of different sporting stadia and even updating. So I'm just going to give an example, just to fill in the corner of a stadium. You can tell that I'm a Stoke fan. Just to fill in the corner of a stadium, if you've been involved with that from a law firm point of view, then that's a competitive edge that you can have and a strategy that you can employ and say, well, we've worked on this before, and they're all fighting over stuff like this. And of course, lots of opportunities for law firms for United that they'll all be thinking about how to answer just that exact question.
Well, thank you so much, Emma. I think that really does nicely kind of round out the different positions that law firms can make and kind of future-proof themselves, I guess, in a sense, to make sure that they're doing the best for the client and also making themselves attractive to win that sort of work from different business perspectives. So that's really interesting. Thank you. And at the advanced level, it's about thinking like a commercial advisor, anticipating future challenges and helping clients position themselves advantageously. So thank you for everyone for joining today's Commercial Awareness Compass. Remember, being commercially aware isn't just about following the news. It's about understanding how these developments shape business decisions and legal strategies. Whether you're just starting out or thinking like a commercial advisor, always ask, how does this impact clients and what can a law firm do to help? Join us next week to keep building your commercial awareness. And until then, prepare without the panic. Thank you.